I am Stephen Samro, and I'm here today to talk about connecting homeless populations to the systems of mental health care. But what I'm really saying is how to connect people experiencing homelessness to any system of care. Because frankly, at this point in what we understand and know about recovery, about homelessness, about mental and substance disorders, it really requires a whole person approach. So we'll talk about that a little bit, and the focus is going to be on mental health. But again, I'm going to reiterate that it's important that we expand this idea of mental health to include addiction challenges and trauma, homelessness, incarceration. There is a whole gamut of things that are connected here. I'm in front of all of you today for a couple of reasons. One, obviously, I'm a training and technical assistance provider, but I also, and I think this is the bigger reason, I'm a person in long-term recovery. And I'm in long-term recovery from what I call the big five of behavioral health challenges. So like so many of my brothers and sisters right now, my primary issue was an opioid use disorder. That was fueled by trauma and some underlying mental health challenges that I've had that I did not ever want to admit to because of stigma. I am a criminal justice survivor. I spent a couple of years in your neck of the woods for cultivation of cannabis. As you all know, it's not even a crime in the state anymore. But I did 2 years. I did my reception at San Quentin, and then I went to Folsom for pot. So you can understand my frustration with that, especially after the laws changed. But the experience was informative. I'll just say that. And it really gave me, I think, some additional value, frankly, in the work that I do today. So I'm also I'm a complex trauma survivor. I've got an ACE score of 9. So, I pretty much have had some serious trauma throughout my life. And I've been in medication-assisted recovery and treatment since 2000. And it's been since mid-2000. Started the program, I think, in the fall. The day I started the program was the last day that I used an illegal drug. That's amazing because I was a poly drug user for my entire life up to that point. So with that, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to explore the prevalence of mental disorders for folks who are experiencing homelessness. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of trauma on that individual. We'll talk about whole person care, and you should be able, when we're done, to restate at least 2 elements of the spirit of whole person care. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. We should be able to all identify the barriers. I don't even know that you need this training to do that. But that prevents the individuals from accessing care. And then we should be able to demonstrate at least 2 things that, an outreach provider, a case manager might be able to do to be person-centered, trauma-informed, and then culturally responsive. Finally, we should be able to talk about the guiding principles of recovery and discuss the importance of a systemic, coordinated, and comprehensive street outreach in connecting people to appropriate care and support. And that kind of is the crux right there. Because if we can't connect, nobody's coming. And I think we already, those of us who do this work at all and provide direct services know the difficulty of getting people to come for services. And there's plenty of reasons for that, but the number one reason is stigma. Let's talk just a minute about kind of the lay of the land and the scope of the challenges. When you look at the numbers here, and obviously this is 2020, I think is the last data that I was able to pull. But excuse me, the January 2020 point in time count had about 580,000 people experiencing homelessness. And it's almost, this number, almost always lower than what the true number is. And I think when I was doing street outreach, our sense was if you get a number, you should just triple it. and that's probably getting more close to the actual number out there. On average, almost 50% of all people experiencing homelessness live with mental illness or a mental disorder. Many of them qualify as having a serious mental illness. And we know poor mental health negatively impacts physical health, and it impacts a person's ability and interest to connect with healthcare and other support systems. And I want to reiterate, a big piece of that is driven by stigma and bias. It's really important we identify person-centered and trauma-informed outreach and engagement approaches. The way I come at this is from that lived experience, both from experiencing homelessness myself and then working with people who are unhoused. And I've done a lot of that here in the Nashville area. I also spent an awful lot of time in a camp down by Oroville, that actually just outside of Gridley, that I lived in and was in active addiction in. So I have a pretty good background around camps. And I'll talk a little bit about how we can reduce the burden on our brothers and sisters by bridging them to other care providers. What is whole person care? Well, the image that you see on the screen is a toolkit that I developed with my team at C4 Innovations in 2021. I'm actually working on the third phase of that right now. And this one is, as you can see, whole person care for people experiencing homelessness and an opioid use disorder. And there was phase 1 and 2, so there's 2 of these. And the one I'm working on now is really whole person care for people experiencing homelessness and mental disorders. In a weird way, it's the same thing. But because we have separated it in our society, sometimes if you come at it with the mental health piece first, those folks who spend their time focused on mental challenges with our brothers and sisters out there may gravitate more to that. And that's fine. The goal for us is really starting to talk more about whole person care and why that is so important. So the whole idea is that it's based on this real deep respect for humanity of the person, right? You may have a challenge with the individual. I'll give you a quick example. I have a strong bias towards alcohol. My family was a horribly abusive one that at the hands of alcohol, and it left a profound mark on me. And so trying to engage with, a group of people whose primary, substance of choice, honestly, is alcohol, it created some challenges for me. And having to suspend that bias and recognize that I had it was really, really important. And what I mean when I say it's based on a profound respect for an individual, you may have an issue that I don't really agree with and that kind of makes me a little uneasy, but that's not who you are as a human being. And I need to see the human being behind that. And I want you to remember too, particularly when we're engaging with folks, typically on the first or second or third time that we're able to have a conversation, we're looking at a snapshot in time of them, right? What we're seeing in front of us is typically, a person at the very worst point in their lives. And that's what we frame it as. But remember that person, somebody birthed that person. There's a mom somewhere. There's a father, almost certainly somewhere. There are people who used to love this person, probably, but there's a whole life that we're ignoring and just focusing in on the deficits: no housing, no transportation, no food, all the things that come with experiencing homelessness. It also takes, this is what I'm talking about, it takes a person in context approach. We're not going to look at this as this snapshot in time moment. We need to be much more deep in how we imagine the human being in front of us. It recognizes that a person's mental health can really be impacted by harmful beliefs. And a lot of those beliefs are driven by the way stigma has marginalized and oppressed an awful lot of folks who are on the street. We also understand that a person's overall health and well-being gets seriously impacted by negative social challenges. So if you find yourself stuck on the street, and every time you find somebody who says they can help, you hear that there's no housing available, you can imagine that, that over time is seriously going to impact somebody, and it really doesn't take a whole lot of time to make that happen. We understand things like income, poor nutrition, lack of that safe and stable housing in an area that isn't surrounded by, crime, poverty, and substance misuse. Those things are really important, especially if we're asking for folks to be, to try and recover. And as I think many of you might already know, the challenges when we're working with people experiencing homelessness is that when we're able to house them, often it's not in the greatest neighborhoods. And many times it's in a neighborhood that they're familiar with, especially if they're from that area. And they're instantly targets for dope dealers and, for folks who would take advantage of them, particularly because they have housing now. And there's an important piece to understand. When we put people in a house, we put them in a house. And all that means is they now have four walls and a roof over their head. We didn't put them in a home, because home is built by community and belonging. And right now, we have a person in the box, usually just sitting there with a little TV, and we're going to say, okay, you're housed, all is good, we'll see you later. We'll be back in a week to just check in on you, and off we go. And we have removed that person from their community. We have isolated that person out of their community, and that person doesn't have any place else to turn to, particularly with any trust, except the community we just yanked them out of. So it's important that we recognize how vulnerable a person that we've housed can be in the first 6-7 months, because his or her community is going to be knocking on the door. And this is part of what I call the culture of homelessness. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get in. But that culture says that, hey, we're all in this together. And, I'm down this week and I need some lunch. If you pick me some lunch next week, when I get I finish that day labor job, I'll get some tobacco or, whatever it may be. We depended on each other, and we use each other's resources because they're almost in a way shared. So when you are housed, you have a bathroom, you have a kitchen, you have a warm place at night. And there's an awful lot of folks who, would like to use those resources right alongside of you. And as you can imagine, your landlord and the neighbors are not going to be particularly happy when, dozens of people experiencing homelessness are coming and going from, Bob or Sandy's house. So housing is the goal, and getting a person home is the ultimate end of that goal. Not housed, but home. All right? And I know that it's a funky distinction, but I think you all get what I said. We use this approach because it is tailored, it's individualized, and it gets community specific. Only you guys in the community will know what is available, what the nuances are, what the cultural sort of ramifications of homelessness are. Are you going to be NIMBY'd out of a neighborhood, not in my backyard kind of thing? Is substance use treatment something that's promoted, or do we look on, an individual experiencing homelessness and identify a single thing? Oh, that person appears to have a mental illness. We'll send that person to this behavioral health provider. Those things are what you all know about your community, and that's what street outreach really should know. And it's also why it's really difficult for people to pop in from someplace else and dive into street outreach and be really successful. It can be done, absolutely, but people from the community that you're practicing in have tremendous power in the knowledge that they carry. And if you're using people with the lived experience of homelessness, particularly from that community, the access to the larger homeless community is within your grasp. And that piece is probably, of all the things that we could hope for, the best thing to hope for. That we can bring somebody onto an outreach team or into case management who's been there, who understands what it's like to experience homelessness and the difficulty in extricating yourself from it. So it is tailored, it's unique, it requires a multidisciplinary team, which really is a circle of care, and we partner with that person. We put that person really in the driver's seat. Now, there's plenty of things that we're going to do in terms of treatment and in terms of recovery support, but we're working together with this person. We're not claiming we're the expert and we know what's wrong with you and we know how to fix you. We may have a pretty good idea of those things, but the truth is the person that you're engaging with, I suspect they pretty much know what's happening for themselves. And we need them to drive this effort with us, because if they're not on board, we can do all of the work that we're trained to do. And you can look around right now today at the results of that. And we have more people on the street today than we probably have ever had in this country. It requires regular communication and coordination of care, and this is done among services that are almost always siloed. Now that's really becoming less and less because providers are getting it. It's a whole person approach. It has to be, and we've seen what happens when services are siloed. Nobody goes. We don't come to them. It's too much on top of trying to live every day while homeless. It makes sense, right? It's just too difficult. It also provides support and services that help people have a healthier and happier life. And that, I can't imagine for somebody who is experiencing homelessness that the idea of a happier life, they would roll their eyes. But the truth is, we really can help a person get there. We're not going to do it for you because we can't, but we'll do everything we can to open a pathway to make that a reality for you. Whole person care requires that the support we're doing is individualized. It's meeting people where they're at, not where we hope they should be or where we expect them to be. It's about managing our expectations of what is capable. And the goal is, honestly, a satisfying and productive life in the community while they enjoy their own healthier and more meaningful lives. And in the process, think about the costs that go away when we're able to bring a person who was, on the street into our community. We see less hospitalization, less recidivism, less trauma. Those things cost us money. And there's an analysis that Stanford did years ago now that talked about the cost of one person on the street on average for 1 year is $40,000. That's probably gone up a bit because that was several years ago. But if every time you see a person experiencing homelessness, that's $40,000 a year worth of our resources, taxpayer dollars, et cetera, going out to support stuff that is surrounding the existence of that individual on the street. I just want to call out really quickly that Surgeon General's report, loneliness and isolation, nailed it, because that's what we've done to our brothers and sisters on the street. We've just ignored them, isolated them. It's why they built their own community. And, I mean, it's not rocket science. If they're not welcome in this community, we're social beings. We need a community. We need people that care. And here is where we find it. We're going to talk a little bit about motivational interviewing. And I don't come at MI in the traditional way. And the reason I don't is because MI, while it is a fantastic tool, when you use it in a clinical setting, it is fantastic. But when you try to take it out onto the street and into the rest of your life, it's a little different. And in particular, when you're engaging on the street with people who are experiencing homelessness, there are a few elements that really usually just show up over and over. And those elements typically involve partnership, acceptance, compassion, and evocation. And let's go through those just briefly. So when we talk about partnership, human to human, right? This is the collaboration, the respect for the person. Where, people talk about it as dancing rather than wrestling. We're kind of engaging and we're, sort of dancing together rather than, I know what you need. No, you don't. That kind of stuff. It is the best practices really are around not doing on or to people, but with and for them. And that gives us collaboration rather than I'm the expert and I got to tell you what to do. A lot of times you probably are the expert on the disease, on what's happening in terms of mental health challenges. But what we do need to remember is so are they. And they are the ones that have been living with these symptoms and conditions for forever. So as much as you're an expert, so too are they. They just use their expertise in a survival way. We use ours to try and support and assist. They need to survive, right? So partnership, what it sounds like. Would it be all right if we have a conversation? How do you feel about this? What do you understand about something like this? And notice these are open-ended questions, right? So, it's all about building an initial relationship. We're going to partner together, and I'm going to walk alongside of you. This is something I say a lot, especially to people I first met. Listen, I walk alongside of you all day long, and I get it. This is this lifestyle is hard, and a lot of times we lose a lot of hope. So I'm going to carry your hope, and I'll carry it right alongside you until together we get you to a point where you're strong enough to carry it on your own again. And that piece, if somebody would have come to me when I was homeless and said that to me, I just started crying. There's no doubt, because somebody cared, somebody heard me, somebody gave a crap. That's pretty powerful. Acceptance is the next piece. And this is really that inherent worth, what I was sharing earlier. Don't look at it the snapshot. Look at the human being, right? This is also where empathy plays a huge role, not sympathy, empathy. We want to empathize with what is occurring, and we may not know what that feels like, right? But it's not, listen, you don't have to go through a nuclear war to understand that somebody who's been impacted by a nuclear bomb is in serious trouble and, is probably not doing very well, we don't have to experience it. What we have to do is realize that for that person, this is what's happened to them. And we can commiserate, basically, affirming strengths and supporting that autonomy, that they have the power to make the decisions. They must have the power to make the decisions. And we're going to support that by helping in, guiding those decisions through careful conversation and through careful recommendations. We're not telling anybody what to do, but what we can do is when we ask somebody, so would you mind if, I just shared a couple of thoughts? It gives them the ability to tell you no, which allows them to hold on to their power. And typically, if you started to build a relationship, they'll say, sure, go ahead. I'm going to share just a little tidbit. When I first started doing street outreach years ago now, I used to go to this little park in downtown Nashville. It's right across from the library. And it was a very busy park for people experiencing homelessness. And there was one person who sat on a bench. She was morbidly obese. I could tell from, just from a distance, his health was poor, and he would not engage. I'd walk up to him and say, hey, brother, what's going on? Hey, I'm good, but I don't need nothing. Okay, and off I went. And about 3 weeks of that, and I visited that park every day, he finally called me over and he said, listen, I've been watching you, and I think that you might be the real deal, but let me tell you, I need some stuff, but here's how it's going to go down. I'm going to give you 3 chances to help me find housing. And if you can't do that in 3 chances, then I'll take everything you want to come here and pass out, but you can kick rocks around anything else that you want to work with me towards. That man in that little conversation took back his power, put himself in control, and then put the onus on me to make it happen for him. That was pretty astounding to me, and especially when I think back about it from, at this point today. And it turns out that gentleman, I was able to get housed. I also was able to get through the SOAR program and got him housing, his insurance, and a little bit of income. He had a SSDI because he did have a job for a long time. That gentleman became my co-outreach worker. He knew every spot, everywhere in Nashville, and basically every person who was chronically homeless in our community. And he introduced me to all of them. And he introduced me to all kinds of secrets like this one. When you're doing your point in time count, don't just look down, look up. And he spends his time, when he knows the point in time count is coming, he spends his time on a fire escape ladder because he knows that none of us look up, right? We just don't look up. So there's somebody we missed right in front of us, basically. We missed them. So when we talk about worth and potential, these pieces are what helps a person experiencing homelessness understand that, you're still valuable. And there are some of us who still care. I know what it feels like to have the community just marginalize and ignore you, but we're not going to do that. And it's important that they believe that somebody cares. The accurate empathy is important, and it sounds like, wow, that sounds complicated. It's, I see that, I would feel hurt and confused about something like that. Part of you isn't sure you're ready to stop using. Part of you wants to get back to a normal life, maybe get your kids back. What we're doing when we have conversations like that is we're trying to build some internal ambivalence, a little internal tension. Because as I said earlier, folks know what they need to do, right? You know, I can't live out here on the, you know, in this box for the rest of my life, you know, but man, I just can't get away from this heroin, or I can't get away from this methamphetamine, or, you know, I don't know why, but I can't seem to hold my housing. That was me. It wasn't my substance misuse. It was my mental illness that made that happen all the time. We want to support their autonomy. You know what's best for you. I don't know. Whatever you deem best for you, as long as it's not illegal, I'm going to support it. I'll help you get there. You know, I'll do what I can. You know, take some time to think about these things before you make some changes. You know, take some time. And this is really a decision that only you're going to be able to make. I'm happy to provide, you know, my opinion, but this is your decision. You empower them, you put the power back in their hands, and as you do that, you can almost see them come to life. Like, wow, you know what? You're right. I can do this. I have some power. You know, I'm somebody. Yes, you are somebody. And we're going to make sure that, you know, this somebody is able to succeed. And then affirming those strengths, I just said it, you are somebody, right? Showed a lot of courage when you did that. Oh man, that took a lot of patience for you to stand there in the face of that stuff. Or, you know, you're the kind of person who really values loyalty. And that's a big trauma trigger for a whole bunch of us, because we have been betrayed and, you know, we've been abandoned. That's a tough one. This is a gentleman who was on LA's big Skid Row. This dude was one of the first people to move in to what was called back then the Project 50, almost a housing first program. And it was a collaboration that used the vulnerability index long before it was the VI for that. And there were 50 units of housing that were available for folks on Skid Row. And the gentleman you're looking at on the left, his name is Edwin Givens. I know Edwin personally. He's an amazing guy. And he would fit the stereotype of what you would assume is a chronically homeless individual. So that picture that is on the right, that's also Edwin. And that's Edwin after a year housed at the Project 50 congregate SROs. It was all single residence occupancy units, but they were super nice. And I know that because I visited him there. And when I came in, the staff said, well, listen, Edwin has agreed to let you guys look at his apartment, but he doesn't engage with people. So, you know, don't be surprised if he doesn't say anything. And we opened the door and met Edwin, and I just started talking to him. He's going to talk to me because I'm going to talk his language. I know the culture of homelessness. I know how to engage here. And it didn't take, it was just, yo, brother, what is going on? This is amazing what you've accomplished. And by the time we finished that visit, he took me to the roof to show me his garden and his tomato plants. And he had $1 million view of the LA skyline. I would never be able to have a view like that. It was just amazing what this man had transformed himself into, all because somebody from Street Outreach found this guy, stayed with him, revisited him over and over, and was able to make a connection to the point where once housing was available, Edwin said, I'll take it. And as soon as he was housed, his life just transformed. Yeah, that's awesome. And Edwin is also the person that is responsible for turning that housing into homes for people experiencing homelessness. It's an amazing guy. That's an amazing story too. Compassion is coming alongside somebody in their suffering. And I think passion, the Latin of passion is actually suffering. And it's about actively promoting somebody's welfare, right? Giving priority to, the person's needs, whatever they may be. And compassionate detachment is really respecting our guest's power enough that we don't rescue them while we're extending some loving compassion in this moment right now. And it's also respecting ourselves enough that we don't take on this person's challenges as our own, and realizing that if we do that, it doesn't serve a good purpose for anyone. And it's a really hard thing for those of us who have the lived experience of these behavioral health issues, and want to serve. We want to give back. It is very difficult for us to do compassionate detachment, and it is really, really an important thing that we need to do. So if you're hearing it, it is, and I do this in my natural life all the time now. Somebody tells me something traumatic, I may just say, standing in solidarity with you. I rarely say I'm so sorry. I say occasionally, you need me to sit here, brother or sister, and I'll do that too. I just honor the individual and the experiences they've gone through, because I've gone through many of those experiences as well. And sometimes there just are no words for what happens to you. And evocation, this is just, we're trying to get at that person's own knowledge and their wisdom and their strengths and what motivates them. And this piece right here is where they take back their power. This is really important, right? Because when we can evoke their own knowledge, their own wisdom, and it brings it to the surface, it's shocking to them. It's like, oh my God, I actually have this stuff. Yes, you do. And this is what it sounds like. What do you want me to know about you? What do you want to share about you? Tell me about your, for the person that I got, housed off the bench, my brother Bone. Tell me about your time riding the rails, dude. That's an amazing thing, man, and I've always wanted to do that. What concerns do you have about, we're getting ready to go look at that new apartment. What concerns do you have? Is there anything really chapping your hide here, right? You're hoping for, you're going to end up getting, approved for housing or whatever it may be. Absolutely, that's awesome. You get the idea, right? I love the quote here. You already have what you need. Together, we're going to find it. That to me sums up what we do in street outreach, what we do in case management, and we do it from that whole person perspective. So when we talked about this whole person care, there are 8 core attributes. You can see them, right? It's person-centered, it's trauma-informed, it's non-stigmatizing, it's racially just, it's housing-focused, it's recovery-oriented, it has peers involved, and it's compassionate. That's, I think, what all of us want, really, right? I mean, those attributes of whole person care, I think, are what we would like to give each one of us consistently, and we all deserve that. Almost always have designed our service systems to really prioritize the needs of the system, the funder, and the service provider over the people that we actually serve, right? And it's how the thing has developed over the years. But today, we're going to put the person and their hopes and their aspirations at the center of what we're doing. If you want somebody to change, if you want to change behavior, you can't demand people do that. You've got to, present some value in them. And if we're not sharing what is going to matter to the person we're engaging with, then we're wasting our time. And more importantly, we're wasting their time, right? So we put that person at the center. We partner with the folks we serve. I didn't tell this guy, I know what you need, and this. We partnered together, and from the time I got that gentleman into housing, I invited him to be my best man at my wedding when I married my partner of 20 years, I don't know, 8 years ago now. And I was also the person that was at his bedside when he died of colon cancer a few years ago. I was the only person at his bedside. And I'm so grateful that I was there, because I couldn't imagine leaving that man to die on his own. So we partner with those people we serve, and we offer choices, and we do shared decision making, because we're not the expert, they are. And we're there to support, right? And we've got resources and we've got knowledge, but that's all we have. We don't control our brothers and sisters. We work together with them. We encourage folks to take an active role, define the goals and the things, the outcomes that I don't call them outcomes to folks when I'm engaging. Call them, what are the things that matter the most to you, right? I'm speaking in the language that folks in that subculture understand. I want to know what matters most to them. I don't care what matters most to the provider. That doesn't matter to me anymore. It's what matters to them that matters. And we need to compel providers to recognize and move beyond our biases and the assumptions that we've built over the years of doing this work, and the judgments about the people that we're working for and what we think might be best for them. It may not be. And, you know, there's 101 reasons why. We're not them. So all we can do is try to evoke out what it is that they need and want, and then do our best to make that happen, so long as we're not taking them, you know, out to get a pouch of crack or, you know, a 40. Our goal is recovery oriented. It's not to support and, you know, kind of perpetuate the situation or conditions that they're, you know, they find themselves in right now. And this piece for me is I think one of the critical pieces about folks on the street. And we often forget that, you know, people are impacted by trauma every single moment that they're homeless. And if you know anything about trauma, and we'll just go through this, right? Here's how it affects people in, you know, as they try to engage in service, or we're hoping they'll engage in our services. They don't want to be seen. They avoid us because we don't see them, right? They ain't going to place no trust in us. The trust that they have given us before has sometimes had their kids taken away, sent them to jail, locked them up in a state hospital, had them restrained in an emergency room. Are you kidding? Do you think they're going to trust us? That's what they remember about us, this community, right? And those people who are trying to help them. That's not who we are, but that's who they remember. And they're more comfortable with the transactional relationship. Remember what I said about the guy, about Bone? You got 3 chances. And after that, I'll take everything that you can bring, but I don't want to deal with you. Transactional. Difficulty keeping appointments, following up on referrals. Why do you think that is? Let me give you an example. We struggled here in Nashville for, I don't know, half a year, you know, wondering why people in the afternoon were just unable to make appointments. Well, it turns out that I sat down one day and I mapped out where the food services were for people who were on the street every day of the week. And what was happening is we were scheduling people for appointments at 1 o'clock across town from where they were going to be able to get their lunch that day. And here's the question. Do you go to the appointment and not eat, or do you eat and you miss the appointment? You pretty much know what the answer to that is, because you don't need the appointment to survive, but you surely do need the food. So yeah, they have a difficulty keeping appointments. And what happens when, they lose their bus pass? If your community has bus passes, that's happened here over and over, or they've sold it. That happens too. How do we get folks to these appointments? One of the ways we do it is connecting with a street outreach worker who's also a peer support specialist or a recovery coach, and then walk alongside of them, because it's scary to go to those places alone. And again, they've been victimized at times. They have, right? We've done some stuff. I can remember telling somebody who had a severe opioid addiction, and I'm real familiar with that. And I had to tell that gentleman, listen, I am so sorry, but I can't even. I need a signed NA, Narcotics Anonymous sheet that you've done 90 meetings. And if you can bring that to me, I'll schedule us an appointment. We'll sit down and talk about putting you on the waiting list for housing. So let me just say, if that was me, I would tell you kick rocks, and I would not remain sober. There's just no way. So, as we think about why it's difficult for folks to make appointments, to trust other people, I want to talk just a second about that trauma piece again, because we know the experience of homelessness on its face is traumatic. But what we often forget is that if you're living homeless, you're likely constantly in a state of hypervigilance. And if you're in a state of hypervigilance, it's very difficult for the cognitive power, the adult in the front of your head that lives in the prefrontal cortex, that adult gets shut off, right? A trauma response sends the adult in the head out, and we are responding off the brainstem. It is pure emotion driving us. So you may be able to get your arms around not having horrible outbursts and acting in ways that people would consider non-compliant and, a bunch of other derogatory terms. You might be able to do that a little bit, but it doesn't take much to trigger another burst of the chemical release that a traumatic incident has. People live like that every single day. They never that never shuts off. And so if that's the case, that trauma impact for them is why you see people who have responses that feel, wow, that's way out of the ordinary, or geez, that person is just totally non-compliant, forget it. No, it's that they're trying to tell you something while they're under a trauma response, and they can't think. It's very difficult for them to get that out. And if we understand that, we can work with that. And we can find a way to, we can find ways to get them to a quiet spot, to partner, to build the relationship before we try to dive into, how are we going to fix you, right? We need to build a relationship, and we need them to trust us. And if they don't trust us, again, they'll take all the stuff we'll give them, but they really don't trust us, right? So what's the point? We have to be non-prejudicial, non-discriminatory, non-stigmatizing, and we got to recognize we have biases. Stigma is a composite of ignorance and prejudice and discrimination. And stigma, I'm going to say it again, and I pray on stigma, is the number one thing I do. This is why we don't come for treatment. It's why we don't come for support. It's why we leave treatment early. And it's also why our families don't talk about it, because the stigma that we get as people in, with a serious mental illness or an addiction challenge or both, they get to enjoy that same stigma through what's called courtesy stigma. So it's why families don't talk about it. So if we can't get the family to talk about it, and if we can't get the person to talk about it, everybody loses. And this just continues. And we sit here going, how come nobody comes for treatment? This is why, right? So we know that when you consistently do this to a person, it will become internalized. And they will play this internal stigma tape over and over, almost constantly. I have been in recovery 23 years. I play it almost every day. And if anything goes wrong, if I'm having a tough time on on an event or something, or I've done something wrong, I might have done 100 things right that day. The only thing I can focus on is what I did wrong. And it's because when that happens to me, what it does is instantly trigger this old stigma that says, see, you're a piece of crap, you're a loser, you can't even do this. That I internalized. And I internalized it from my family first, and then from providers and the community who just didn't have any reason to do anything for me. So whole person care, that's the antidote. It is the antidote to stigma. It is the antidote to being marginalized and oppressed. And it's how we've got to move forward. There's no other way that is going to have the success that we see in whole person care. Let's take about 3 minutes here just for this video.
My name is not those people. I am a loving woman, a mother in pain, giving birth to the future, where my babies have the same chance to thrive as anyone. My name is not inadequate. I did not make my husband leave us. He chose to, and chooses not to pay child support. Truth is, though, there isn't a job base for all fathers to support their families. While society turns its head, my children pay the price. My name is not problem and case to be managed. I am a capable human being and citizen, not a client. The social service system can never replace the compassion and concern of loving grandparents, aunts, uncles, fathers, cousins, community, all the bonded people who need to be but are not present to bring children forward to their potential. My name is not lazy, dependent welfare mother. If the unwaged work of parenting, homemaking, and community building are factored into the gross domestic product, my work would have untold value. And I wonder why my middle-class sisters, whose husbands support them to raise their children, are glorified, and they don't get called lazy and dependent. My name is not ignorant, dumb, or uneducated. I live with an income of $621 and $169 in food stamps. Rent is $585. That leaves $36 a month to live on. I am such a genius at surviving that I could balance the state budget in an hour. Never mind that there's a lack of living wage jobs. Never mind that it's impossible to be the sole emotional, social, and economic support to a family. Never mind that parents are losing their children to the gangs, drugs, stealing, prostitution, social workers, kidnapping, the streets, the predator. Forget about putting money into our schools. Just build more prisons. My name is not lay down and die quietly. My love is powerful, and my urge to keep my children alive will never stop. All children need homes and people who love them. They need safety and the chance to be the people they were born to be. The wind will stop before I let my children become a statistic, before you give in to the urge to blame me, the blame that lets us go blind and unknowing into the isolation that disconnects us. Take another look. Don't go away. For I am not the problem, but the solution. And my name is not those people.
That is a hard video for me to watch. Part of this work that we do, we have not been racially just, and many of us have been blind to what's happened. And it's not your fault. It just is. But we have a responsibility not to be blind anymore. And so, when we need to have courageous conversations, and they can be really uncomfortable at times, we still need to stay engaged, and we need to sit in that discomfort. And we should expect and actually accept that it's not going to just end, and that we're going to have to grapple with things. And a lot of those things are inside of us that, make you uncomfortable. And it's important we speak our truths now more than ever, and we support and champion those who we know are also speaking truth. So, we stay engaged. We remain morally and emotionally and intellectually and socially involved in this dialogue. And we do experience that discomfort, and we acknowledge that it's inevitable, especially when we're talking about race. And we've got to expect and accept that non-closure, because we're going to hang out in uncertainty, and we're not and can't rush to quick solutions. That's what got us here. And we need to speak that truth. We need to be open about our thoughts and feelings, and we should stop saying what we're hoping other people wanted to hear. It's a lot harder to stand in your truth and speak truth than I think a lot of us realize. But there's no bystanding allowed anymore. We just can't do that anymore. Talk a minute just about housing focus, outreach, and housing first. Housing first is really based around two core convictions. It can be done in a bunch of different ways. A lot of people don't do it perfectly right. Some do, but the goal is to eliminate as many barriers as we can. Really, it should be no barrier housing. So housing is a basic human right. It's not a reward for some sort of clinical success, or because you complied with the case manager's, orders that you do this, and this before we do that. Once the chaos of homelessness gets away from us, clinical and social stabilization happen a lot faster, and they last a lot longer. So the housing first principle, it's just to move folks right in from the street or the shelter, no precondition of treatment. Listen, the only thing you have to do is abide by the leash. So we're going to go over this leash completely, but that's what you have to abide by. If you choose to, drink alcohol in your apartment, smoke marijuana in your apartment, those things are, your choice. They have consequences, as you are aware, but this is your home, and you abide by the leash, and that's all you need to do. We are provided to bring support to that housing. We're the ones who help them move from house to home. And it's not, we don't base that on whether or not they want to join us for services. We're not coercing them and dangling the keys to the house. And if you go to 90 meetings, I might be able to get you these. No, it's not how it is. The continued tenancy, not dependent on participating in any services. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be showing up every week, checking up, stop you saying hi, and just mention it. Hey, we're here. If you need some support, don't hesitate to call on us. We also need to target the most disabled, the most vulnerable members in this community that we can find. And that's why the Vulnerability Index and the VI-SPDAT were created. There are a lot of challenges with those today, and there are many different ways to come at identifying vulnerability, and that's really what we're trying to do with Housing First units. It embraces a harm reduction approach to addiction rather than demanding abstinence. And at the same time, we have to be ready to support a resident's commitment to a recovery journey. There's a lot to that. Residents have to have leases and tenant protections under the law. That's why I said we'll go through that lease, because that's what binds you to this apartment, and these are the rules you have to follow. And we can do Housing First in either single site or a project-based, congregate housing unit. It can be done anywhere. There is a critical importance of choice and access here, because there is tremendous depression and mental stress in, you can see the picture on the left. That's not a very safe place for a gentleman to be sleeping, right? I mean, it isn't. And how many brothers and sisters do you see like that in your community? I know here, there's a lot of them. So these are the 10 guiding principles of recovery. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, because the ones I want us to focus on are the ones in red. It's person-driven. It's holistic, whole person. It's supported through a relationship and the social network. Because if you want to pull somebody out of the culture of homelessness, you better have a culture that is something that would be valuable to them. And right now, the mainstream community culture that we're all in doesn't have that. But a culture of recovery, we want to build that cultural recovery space for them, so that they're supported and that they're welcomed with open arms, and that there are no preconditions on their participation in that community. We address trauma, because trauma underlies almost everything else. And I can tell you, if you show me somebody who's living homeless, I will almost guarantee somewhere in their past, there is a significant traumatic event that is still impacting them. And finally, it's based on respect. Without respect, you can understand why people would just tell you to kick rocks, just ignore you. They get disrespected enough. So a recovery-oriented system of care, I share this because we are really trying to do this in communities across the country. It's a network of care, of formal and informal services and care providers. And they try to use the system of care to come at the whole person, right? And they're looking for families that have been impacted by severe substance use disorders, co-occurring disorders. The whole goal of the system is that there's no wrong door, right? No matter where you go and however you come into a ROSC, that's what this is called, ROSC, you are capable of getting the services and supports that you need. Peer support is exactly what it sounds like. People who have had the experience, people who may have been homeless, may have had an addiction challenge, and have been able to successfully extricate themselves from whatever that situation was, and are now trained and willing and actually really, really driven to give back. So the value is that we bring our own experience of recovery, and we walk beside our brothers and sisters on that journey, and they can trust us. We have cred, right? We have way more cred than anybody else in the community. And it takes that kind of cred to make the connection. Now, you can do it. You don't ever have to experience homelessness to be able to do street outreach. But I am telling you that if you've experienced homelessness, you are primed to do this kind of work because the people will be attracted to you. The folks that you want to come in will be attracted to that. So if you think about how peer support is delivered, emotional, supportive, informational, tell you where those resources are, brother, and let me share, you don't want to go to this place because, right? Instrumental, here's how we do this. Here's how we're going to make this happen. Yep, I was able to get you the store approval. That's awesome. And affiliational, we're connected. So what does it mean to help? Well, it starts with loving kindness for the self. And I just really like that quote, because as a person in long-term recovery, I'm nowhere near loving kindness for oneself. I don't know that I'll ever get there. That's internalized stigma. I hate the term resilience. I'm just going to tell you, I hate that term, because what resilience says is that it returns you to the previous state before you had these issues. I don't want to go back to that. That's why I had the issues. So when people say, oh, you're so resilient, you might think that that's a compliment. No, it isn't. What is a compliment to me is that I'm not resilient. I am determined, and I just persevered through the hell of that existence in order to access recovery, so that I can actually move into discovery and live a life that I've always wanted, but never knew how to get there. So, I know we use resilience all the time. I'm just telling you from a personal perspective, I hate the word, and it doesn't reflect our experience. It just doesn't. So, we can look at the 5 pillars. It's great. Self-awareness, mindfulness, self-care, which self-care for me is critical. And it's critical for all of you, whether you know it or not. And then the benefits, they're great. Except when you run into somebody like me and says, no, resilience is not, that's not what happened to me. This is really, for me, this is where my heart and soul live. It's in street outreach, it's in connecting as a provider. And it means to move outside the walls. You don't do outreach sitting in your chair in the, in your office. You don't do it sitting in the shelter. That's in reach. Outreach is going out. You hit the brick, right? You engage in diverse settings with diverse individuals. Mainstream services and homeless service delivery are what you bring to the table. Build and you nurture those credible, strong relationships. If you don't have them, people will take what you have, but you'll be wondering why they didn't show up for their referral appointment, and you will soon be disappointed because they didn't do what we thought that they should. And then our strategies really are around instilling that hope, carrying the hope for them until they're strong enough to do it on their own, and helping get through the incredible amount of challenges and barriers that face anyone who's trying to extricate themselves from homelessness. There are some underlying beliefs around outreach, we know that homelessness is not a choice, but we also know that kindness and clean socks ain't going to cut it, right? It's great to take care of immediate needs, but many times we get so wrapped up in the minutia of that stuff that we forget what the ultimate goal is. So what is the ultimate goal of street outreach? What is the ultimate goal of street outreach? Lincoln, to link clients to services. These are beautiful. Connection and engagement to others. Jeremy, right on. Meeting people where they're at. Beautiful. Community connection. All of us lost sight of what the ultimate goal of outreach and homeless services are. We've gotten caught up in the minutia of providing the services that we can do because there's no housing available, right? So, it's one thing to say, yeah, we're gonna get the, we're here to help you get into housing. How do you do that? You don't have any housing, and many places don't have housing. In fact, the vast majority of them don't have housing in the way that would be affordable and how we could use it. So I think I'm not surprised at all how that just played out. I frankly expected it, and I just want to reiterate: there's not one wrong answer in there, and every single thing that everybody said are all really important things that we need to do. But when we're doing them, we need to keep in mind that ultimately what we want to do is get this person into a home, not just a house, but into a home. Trusting relationship, everybody deserves housing. I don't care what they've done. We send murderers and rapists to prison and they're housed. Right? So everybody deserves housing. That's probably not housing I'd like to revisit again anytime soon, but it's better than putting your head on the curb tonight. And it does take a community. It takes all of us to do this, including our brothers and sisters who are down and out on the street. The work that outreach providers do, for me, I really subscribe person-centered, trauma-informed, culturally responsive, strengths-based, gotta be. And if we come at it this way, it's pretty easy to think about, we probably want some outreach staff that have had lived experience of homelessness. Makes sense, right? Doesn't have to be the entire team, but it's really helpful. And it's not just helpful to us, it's helpful to somebody who may have recently, gotten housed and needs an income. It needs to, feel like they matter in this community. And often, folks, when that happens, they want to go out. They want to give back. They want to tell other people in their community that, subculture of homelessness. We got stuff that can help. We can, look, I'm working. We got stuff that we can do, and the trust for that. There's nothing more powerful, because they'll believe him or her way more than they're going to believe us. Right? So if that person's saying it, it must be true. It's like reading something on the internet. If you've heard it on the internet, the services to be effective, we just rattle these off too. Person-centered, housing-focused, strengths-based, racially just, trauma-informed, recovery-oriented, peer-integrated, self-compassionate, culture-proficient, and culturally humble. Cultural humility is essential today, because we'll never get beyond bias if we don't. We must be aware of the impact of stigma and bias, and not just be aware, but when we see it, we gotta call it out. And the reason we have to call it out is because a lot of times we stigmatize without knowing, right? Or we will use things that have just been, in our lives for Aunt Jemima pancake mix, the Washington Redskins, there are things that have been offensive to our brothers and sisters of color for a very, very long time. And we've not even, we've just been in blind spots about that. And I think, thankfully, the Aunt Jemima pancake mix has turned to Pearl Milling. So they got it. They understood the impact of that. But that's my point. We need to be aware, and we need to stand up and tell people why this is a problem. And we don't have to be jerks about it. We just need to share that, here's why this is stigma, and here's why we want to talk about it. The principles meet us where we're at in every way, meet our basic needs. That's why I said every single thing that you guys commented on is meeting basic needs. It's awesome. We want to be respectful, and we need to treat people with dignity. And I know sometimes that's tough when, things aren't going, perfectly well, but everybody deserves our dignity. They just, they do. And recognize the relationship is key. Without it, you might give out some socks, but you're not going to do a whole lot more than that. And then those safe, open, friendly spaces, regardless of settings. I'll just say good luck with that, because sometimes you're in a position where there's 20 people around you and you're going to sit down and yak with somebody, in the middle of all of those people. So we'll do it to the extent that we can, but manage your expectations is probably the better way to put it. We need to shift these priorities because we have been isolated for a long time, very siloed, and we move away from just shelter and transitional housing. In fact, HUD doesn't hardly even fund transitional housing anymore. They do a little bit, but the goal is prevention, turn that stuff off upstream, and then if we can't prevent it, then we need permanent supportive housing as fast as we can get them. And to do that, we need a community involved. You can't do it without the village. You just can't. When we're doing street outreach, when we're looking for folks who are experiencing homelessness and mental and co-occurring disorders, conducted on behalf of our community, not just the mainstream community, but our community of people experiencing homelessness. It is being collaborative across systems and organizations. That's the goal and purpose of HMIS, the Homeless Management Information System. That was why HMIS was created. It's not done what everybody dreamed it should, but that's more because of the way that we've sort of botched implementation of it. We need to be really careful about how we use our resources. And again, that's why HMIS was so important, because it showed us where we were duplicating, where we were wasting things, and how to stop that. We need funding, and we need multiple streams of it. And all of you already know, we do this work on a shoestring, and there ain't a whole lot of money in homeless outreach. You are not here for a paycheck. You may be living, but your soul is in this. It's not for the money. We do need to understand the need for documentation, and understanding how to recognize a very high need individual, because they may not recognize it themselves, and there's no way they can tell you that. The process of outreach, when you look at SAMHSA, this is what they recommend. I help develop these. Locate folks who wouldn't be served otherwise. That means get out of the shelter. Those folks that are already getting services, okay? Find the folks who won't come to the shelter, who might have a pet that they're worried about, who may have a younger child that when they go to the shelter, the child is at that weird age where, oh, you have a boy? No, he's got to go to the men's shelter and you have to go to the women's shelter. Are you kidding? You want me to give up my son? You get it, right? Engage in that trusting relationship. Screen for housing. Assess the health and the behavioral health stuff that's happening. You're not there to treat it. You're there to see if it's happening and then provide some gentle support around it. Just like it says, direct care and services is able. And what's that ultimate goal of homeless outreach? Refer to housing. And if you can do the SOAR program for folks, particularly with serious mental illness, you'll get all of this: housing, health, behavioral health treatment, insurance, and a check in your hand. And then the most important piece for us, follow folks into housing and stay in touch. If we don't do that, I put 27 people in housing at the same time in a brand new SRO. Awesome. It was brand new. And within a year, all of them were gone and 4 of them were dead because they didn't have community around them. We put them in a box. We said that was great, and off they went. So I only raised harm reduction because it's an important piece of the work that we do. And when you see it in action, it is not, this is not something that tells people, yep, it's okay to do drugs. It reduces the risk of people who are going to do what they're going to do. And that doesn't make them bad people. And Harm reduction is different in many places. Some places aren't going to talk about syringe services. Some places don't want to talk about supervised consumption sites. Okay. Harm reduction is key in the work that we're doing with our brothers and sisters when we can't get them housed. I put these two toolkits here. You can download them at this place, at the HHRC website. With that, I'm just going to close this event and say thank you again to everybody that was here today.